Okay, so hopefully this part of technology will work for us. As always, you can find a PDF or just the regular PowerPoint on Carmen as well, if that's what you would prefer. So, what we're looking at is an alteration in the physiology of the plant. There are many, many, many disease-causing agents, but it boils down to a loss of productivity. And when there's a loss of productivity, what we have to do is decide, is that something that we can live with or should live with, or is this something that we need to prevent? There are two basic types, biotic and abiotic. And a biotic agent is something that's caused by an organism. A disease-causing organism, a fungus, a bacteria, a nematode, some sort of pathogen. An abiotic agent is going to be something in the culture of the plant, lack of nutrients, temperature problems that we're having, lack of oxygen, too much water, too little water, too much sun, not enough sun. And those things are going to change the behavior of the plant. The behavior could be an abnormal appearance. It could be a reduction in photosynthesis. It could be as so severe as a loss of the crop. But basically what we're looking for is a change in the physiology of the plant. All of these things have to be there. This is sometimes the hardest thing for people to understand. The environment has to be correct, the pathogen has to be there, and the host has to be there. So it's really weird to think, as many diseases as there are out there, and as many pesticides as we have to deal with diseases, that most plants are actually immune to most pathogens. And even when you have a susceptible plant and the right pathogen, if the environment is not correct for the development of the disease, you will not get the disease. So all three of these conditions must be met for a disease to take place. Fungi are the most important. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. Some of them are fatal. A vascular wilt, for example, is a fungus that gets into the vascular system of the plant and plugs it up. And if the plant can't move water and nutrients, that's a problem. Some are cosmetic. So if we look right here, this is black tar leaf spot. You can kind of see why it's called black tar. That is never fatal that I have ever seen. It is basically a cosmetic thing. Powdery mildew on your lawn, that is almost always a cosmetic thing. Now, here's the thing though. It's a cosmetic thing in my lawn, and I'm not even going to worry about it. But if I was running a golf course, I can't have cosmetic things. So now I'm going to have to do something about that. So these are all, again, challenges that we may have to deal with. They may be things that we look at and we go, well, that looks bad, but I'm going to hope next year the environment is not right for the development of the disease. So the link there takes you to an animation. It's a really cool animation. It's about 4 minutes long of how fungi penetrate plant tissue. So when you get the opportunity, I highly recommend you go look at that. Again, if we look at some of these things are really, really nasty. Late blight on potato, for example, is something that's really, really bad. That's the disease that caused the Irish potato famine. Downy mildew on a viburnum, I might not worry about that unless I'm selling those viburnum. Downy mildew on my impatiens, however, and now I've lost my entire impatiens crop. Phytophthora stem rot, that happens to be in soybeans. That is a disease that's caused when the weather gets too wet and there's too much water in the soil. And now you could see how that stem has simply collapsed. So that's something that we're going to have to try to do as a preventative, if at all possible. Sometimes these are things that we can see even. So most of the time what you're seeing is the symptoms of the disease. What changes is the plant having. But sometimes we can actually see the disease itself. So on that tomato is a disease called botrytis. And if you just breathe in, you've breathed botrytis spores. That's how common those spores are in the air. And if you let it go long enough, it develops into this really ugly gray mold. It can happen on fruit as you're seeing here, but it can also happen on leaves and on flowers. So it's a very, very common disease. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see, again, what you're seeing is a fungus plugging up the vascular system of that particular plant, and that's obviously a fatal problem. The next thing is bacteria. They're a little less common. They can be very aggressive in plants. They're hard to treat. They're not usually fatal, although they can be. Interestingly enough, if we look at this right here, this really funny looking little tumor, this is a bacteria that gets in there and genetically alters the plant to grow these tumors like this to protect the bacteria. That same bacteria we can utilize to insert other genetics into plants. So we actually utilize this bacteria to cause genetic engineering in some plants. Most of the time our bacteria are more cosmetic. They're a little harder to treat because we don't have an immune system for our plants. Viruses are impossible to treat. There's nothing you can do about them if you get them. They are vector transmitted, meaning an insect or a people can transmit them. They can be transmitted from plant to plant if the roots are grafting underneath the soil. They usually cause really weird, funky things. So if you look at those eggplants in the top, the one on the left is a normal eggplant, and all of the other ones have a virus, and they do some really weird things. Now, as a homeowner, I still can't eat that, but the plant will survive that. The virus doesn't want to kill the plant. If we look at that hosta, I could grow that in my garden, no problem. I can't sell that, but I can grow it in my garden. That lettuce, you can't sell that either. And I probably even wouldn't want to eat that, even though technically I could, because the plant viruses don't impact people. So it really depends upon where your angle comes from. So if you're a homeowner and you get a virus in a hosta or an ornamental plant, you're probably not going to do anything about it. If you're a grower, you have one choice, and that is destruction of the crop. These last guys, these are little wiggle worms. They're almost microscopic. They're definitely a lot easier to see under a microscope. But these are little soil worms. They can be internal or external, meaning they can be inside the plant cells or they can be between the plant cells. And their job is to get into the roots of your crops. Again, these don't usually kill the plants, because if the plants die, the nematodes lose their protection. But it lowers crop production, because if your root system isn't well developed, then your plant isn't going to develop well. And if your plant doesn't develop well, then your fruit production or your seed production isn't going to develop well.
Nematode Meloidogyna incognita is one of the most important plant parasitic nematodes, as it is able to infest almost all kinds of crops. Juveniles try to penetrate the root at the same site and at the same time. In most cases, the juveniles invade the root by intracellular penetration. However, sometimes juveniles also invade the intercellular space between two adjacent.
So there you could see in the video them trying to get into the roots. So you could see the individual plant cells, which gives you an idea of how small these nematodes are. They can be very destructive. They produce in large quantities, and they can be very, very difficult to control. Most of the time you're controlling parasitic nematodes with other nematodes to kill your plant nematodes. So if you go on YouTube, you can find some really cool videos of animal nematodes eating plant nematodes. All right, as always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to get in touch.